Welcome, my soft-thinking listener. You've found yourself in the company of the sleepy sloth once again. A slow, scientifically minded fellow who enjoys facts, sanitation systems, and things that flush in the most ancient, unhurried of ways. I must tell you something before we begin. Today, I consider myself a scientist in toilets. A scientist wannabe who is almost always correct, except for those few times when I am not. But even then, I prefer to drift gently onward, rather than fuss over it. Because what truly matters is the information itself. Before I start, please, let me know. What is the most boring thing you would secretly love hearing about? Let me know gently in the comments. Now, let us begin today's episode with the earliest toilets in human history. In the stillness of 4000 BCE, in the Indus Valley, among the neat, baked brick cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, there existed a form of cleanliness so remarkable in its mundanity that it deserves our slow admiration. The people there, organized and thoughtful, constructed small chambers, private ones, often upstairs, where water and gravity became quiet collaborators. Clay pipes and terracotta drains guided waste away from homes into street channels and cesspits lined with bricks. These weren't primitive conveniences. Oh no. They were quietly revolutionary. Many scholars believe that each home had a unique system of vertical shafts and water chutes, allowing daily life to proceed in hygienic silence. No one celebrated this achievement with song or story, yet each flush, if we can call it that, was a whisper of civilization itself. Let us drift, ever so slowly, over those ancient rooftops, and imagine the cool touch of fired clay beneath the hand of some unnamed craftsman who never imagined his work would be remembered by sleepy sloth thousands of years later. Around 3500 BCE, in the lands we now call Mesopotamia, the toilet became simpler, and somehow duller, in the best possible way. The humble pit latrine appeared, merely a hole in the ground, sometimes lined with stones, sometimes left bare, quietly receiving the organic leftovers of early city life. It was not glamorous, but it worked. In places like Uruk and Eridu, pits were dug deep enough to separate people from smell, which, for the ancient world, was an admirable achievement. Clay shards and silt were occasionally layered for absorption, a practice that would be lost and rediscovered many times across history. You may not care. And that is completely fine. Because this is not the kind of fact that demands attention. It simply exists, content in its obscurity, like a slow puddle after rain. By 3000 BCE, along the fertile banks of the Nile in Egypt, toilets took on a slightly more formal shape. Some were crafted from limestone or wood, positioned over sand-filled vessels. In wealthier homes, attendants would replace the sand when full, ensuring cleanliness with a kind of ceremonial precision. In public areas, such as workers' villages near pyramids, rows of communal seats, carved with exacting care, suggested a quiet, practical togetherness. The Egyptians, ever precise, even had drainage channels leading to disposal pits. One might imagine the air, dry and still, carrying the faint scent of earth rather than waste. A small miracle of design. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the ancient Egyptians sometimes placed small aromatic cones of resin on their heads during daily life, melting slowly in the sun to mask odors. Such attention to scent reminds us how connected the toilet was, even then, to ideas of purity and dignity. Let us float gently onward to the island of Crete around 2500 BCE, where the Minoans built palatial structures filled with unexpected sophistication. Within the palace of Knossos, archaeologists found stone-built toilets complete with a vertical water shaft. Rainwater or stored water could be used to rinse away waste, an early cousin of the flush. The Minoans also had elaborate drainage tunnels, with terracotta pipes fitted snugly together using a gentle taper, narrow at one end, wide at the other, ensuring the smooth downward journey of water. These systems murmured softly beneath the palace floors, out of sight, much like veins under skin. It is said that their design principles influenced later Aegean cultures, though few would ever whisper a word about toilets in heroic epics. And yet, the silence itself feels fitting. Because toilets, much like sleep, ask only for quiet cooperation. Now, very slowly, we drift eastward, to the settlements of early China around 2000 BCE. Here, in the still air of the Yellow River Basin, ceramic toilet vessels appeared, meticulously fired, shaped, and polished for function. Some were designed for seated use, others as standing jars. Archaeological findings from Erlatao and other early urban sites suggest a growing awareness of sanitation. The ceramic surface was easy to clean, resistant to absorption, and had a faint, satisfying coolness. There is something deeply peaceful about this detail, the smoothness of ceramic, the care of its makers, the slowness with which such innovations spread. No one rushed to patent the idea. No one hurried to improve it. It simply was. As if the world had all the time it needed to learn the art of cleanliness. And then, around 1800 BC, we find ourselves back in Mesopotamia again, where pit latrines began to evolve into something more complex. Some were connected to drainage systems made of clay pipes, sloping carefully downward to carry away wastewater. This subtle use of gradient, just a few degrees of tilt, was enough to prevent stagnation. The builders probably tested the flow by pouring small bowls of water, watching how it trickled along the surface. Their slow observations shaped the earliest understanding of plumbing, centuries before anyone gave it a name. It is humbling, in a soft and sleepy way, to imagine how these uncelebrated innovations formed the quiet foundations of modern hygiene. You may not remember any of this when you wake. And that is perfectly fine. For these facts, like ancient drains, were meant to flow away unnoticed. Softly now. Let us linger around 12,500 years before our time, in the gentle dust and sunlight of ancient Egypt, where life along the Nile flowed as predictably as the river itself. Within the homes of the well-planned city dwellers, the toilet, quietly practical and beautifully unremarkable, found its place among the bricks and limestone. These early Egyptian toilets were often connected to simple sewage channels, their sloping paths guiding water and waste toward small cesspits lined with stone. There was a kind of careful geometry in it all. Each block measured, each pipe laid at the faintest downward tilt. The artisans who placed these early drains probably didn't think of themselves as engineers. And yet, in their patient work, they built the rhythm of sanitation that would echo across centuries. One can almost imagine the cool hush of those stone chambers, where the air stayed still and dry, and where cleanliness, though seldom spoken of, became an unassuming ritual. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. Traces of natron, a naturally occurring salt used by the Egyptians for cleaning and preservation, have been found near some of these early latrines. It suggests that even waste, in its humble place, was treated with the same methodical care that they gave their sacred dead. A devotion to order, carried out not in temples, but in the quietest corners of the home. And then, gently onward, to the sun-baked hills and echoing corridors of ancient Greece, around 10,500 years before our time. There, in the great palaces of Mycenae and Tiryns, and later on the island of Crete, the Greeks carved stone seats over narrow drainage pits. They were simple, solemn things, rectangular slabs with smooth edges, worn over time by use and by the weight of ordinary life. Each seat sat above a narrow channel that carried water away, guided by gravity and patient craftsmanship. Archaeologists have found terracotta pipes from this era, their interiors polished by the slow trickle of centuries-old water. These early toilets were not for everyone, only the noble or wealthy could enjoy such calm convenience, but they stood as quiet reminders that even the grandest societies find dignity in small comforts. In those dim, cool rooms, the sound of water slipping away might have been one of the softest, most private sounds in all the world. Let us drift now to about 9,000 years before our time, when the people of early Rome began to favor the modest charm of the chamber pot. These were small vessels, often made of bronze, clay, or later, glazed pottery, used in bedrooms and tucked away beneath beds or chairs. The Romans, with their love of order and routine, used them in both humble cottages and opulent villas. The act of emptying these pots was an uncelebrated profession, done at dawn or under cover of night, as city dwellers sought to maintain the illusion of cleanliness in crowded quarters. The contents were sometimes taken to fields as fertilizer, a slow recycling of life's most unglamorous remnants. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Roman potters would occasionally decorate these vessels with small engravings or symbols, nothing lavish, just quiet marks of craftsmanship. Even something meant to be unseen was shaped with care. The chamber pot, in its practicality, carried both necessity and artistry. An object that asked for no praise, yet received a kind of eternal remembrance through the ashes of time. And ever so softly, we drift to around 8,000 years before our time, when Greece again turned its attention to the public sphere. Communal latrines began to appear, rows of smooth stone benches laid over gently sloping channels. Water flowed steadily below, often drawn from nearby aqueducts or cisterns, ensuring a continuous rinse. These spaces were designed not just for function, but for conversation. Imagine the murmurs, the rustling of tunics, the slow echoes of voices blending with the faint sound of trickling water. It was, in a way, a social ritual, an early experiment in shared hygiene. And though the thought might seem strange to our modern minds, there is something oddly peaceful about it, a recognition that even the most private of acts can belong to the rhythms of community. Archaeological traces of these rooms, found in cities like Olympia and Delos, show careful masonry, polished by centuries of quiet use. Now, as we move with unhurried calm toward the lands of early China, roughly 7,000 years before our time, we find something delicate and refined, the porcelain waste vessels of ancient households. These were elegant things, white, cool to the touch, and crafted with a precision that bordered on devotion. The Chinese potters had already begun perfecting the art of high-fired ceramics, creating vessels that were both watertight and beautifully symmetrical. Used within homes and sometimes in royal courts, these porcelain toilets in waste jars represented not only hygiene but also harmony between form and function. The smooth surface resisted absorption, allowing for easy cleaning, an innovation that may have influenced ceramic design far beyond sanitation. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, some scholars suggest that these early vessels laid the groundwork for the artistry of later porcelain wares, proving that even the humblest inventions can inspire beauty centuries later. It is a lovely thought, that something so practical could one day evolve into art. And then, softly winding through the gentle hills of central Italy, we find ourselves around 6,500 years before our time, where the Etruscans, the quiet innovators of pre-Roman civilization, began to shape what would one day become the Roman sewer system. Their towns were built with stone channels running beneath the streets, guiding runoff and waste toward larger drainage tunnels. It was a world of earthy engineering, of stone fitted against stone with slow precision. The Etruscans saw no glamour in this work, and yet their legacy endures invisibly beneath the foundations of later Rome. When the Romans expanded the idea into vast networks like the Cloaca Maxima, they were simply perfecting what the Etruscans had begun, a silent partnership between earth, water, and gravity. In those early tunnels, lit by flickering oil lamps and echoing with the faint sound of moving water, civilization was quietly teaching itself how to breathe cleanly. But let us not rush. For there is a special kind of serenity in these small steps toward cleanliness. Each one a quiet gesture toward order, toward the simple, necessary act of care that every society must rediscover. Again and again. Softly now. We find ourselves drifting toward the time of about 8,000 years before our own. When the cities of ancient Greece, those warm, sunlit clusters of marble and clay, began to hum quietly with the flow of running water. In their crowded urban neighborhoods, the Greeks built communal latrines, places of calm routine rather than privacy. Rows of smooth stone benches lined the rooms, each one carved with thoughtful precision, their openings leading to gently sloping channels where water, drawn from aqueducts or cisterns, flowed continuously below. It was not luxury, but it was order, an understated achievement that allowed a city to breathe. The air might have carried the faint scent of damp stone and trickling water, a kind of steady, rhythmic hush that mirrored the slow conversations shared among users. These public spaces were social in a soft and practical way, binding citizens not by ceremony, but by necessity. And yet, there was elegance in this simplicity, the coolness of stone beneath the skin, the echo of sandals against tile, the constant murmur of movement below. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. The word latrine itself has ancient roots in the Latin lavatrina, meaning a place for washing, reminding us that for early civilizations, the act of waste and the act of cleansing were never far apart, both woven into the rhythm of daily life. Ever so gently, we drift onward to around 7,500 years before our time, into the orderly heart of ancient Rome, where public toilets began to appear in the bustling centers of the city. These facilities, open to citizens of many classes, were architectural marvels of quiet practicality. Rows of marble or stone seats curved along the walls, often arranged above continuous streams of running water that carried waste into underground drains. Beneath these flows lay the great arteries of Roman engineering, the early drainage networks that would one day connect to the Cloaca Maxima, one of the oldest surviving sewer systems in the world. In these public latrines, people gathered not only for bodily relief, but for conversation, business, and idle gossip. The soundscape was distinct, a gentle blend of trickling water, echoing footsteps, and the faint resonance of civic life. The Romans treated these spaces as extensions of the city's social body, places both functional and communal. One can imagine the subtle coolness of marble, the glimmer of torchlight reflected on wet stone, and the quiet pride of a civilization that considered even sanitation an act of collective design. And with the same slow current, our thoughts drift eastward. To the refined households of early China, around 7,000 years before our time, where comfort found a quieter expression in the form of wooden toilet seats. Unlike the communal stone benches of the Mediterranean, these were crafted for individual homes, smooth, carefully sanded, and shaped to fit the contours of use. Wealthier families commissioned artisans to create wooden frames that could rest over ceramic or clay containers, making the act of sitting more graceful and private. There is something tender about this innovation, a reflection of a culture that valued harmony between body and environment, even in the most ordinary routines. The scent of polished wood, the faint creak as weight met the seat, the easy balance between practicality and comfort, all spoke to a gentle human instinct for refinement. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. Early Chinese texts describe the use of small paddles or flat sticks, made from bamboo, as cleaning tools before the invention of paper. Their smooth surfaces were washed and reused, a humble but ingenious solution from a civilization already deeply attuned to the art of resourcefulness. Let us float, with a nearly imperceptible shift, toward roughly 6,500 years before our time, when experiments in Greece took a most fascinating turn. In larger settlements, places touched by the influence of Minoan engineering and the steady curiosity of Greek inventors, there were attempts to create water-flushed latrines. These early systems used small channels of moving water to rinse away waste, often connected to wells or rain-fed reservoirs. It was an idea ahead of its age, to combine the gentle power of flow with the static needs of stone. Archaeological traces of these designs, found in places like Olynthus, show channels cut precisely into the floor, angled just enough to ensure the soft, continuous drift of water. Though not yet mechanical in the modern sense, these systems hinted at a dawning understanding of hydraulics. To imagine such innovation is to see the slow mind of civilization learning to trust gravity, water, and patience, the quiet trio that governs every functioning drain. And then, around 6,000 years before our time, Rome once again hums beneath our wandering gaze. Here, the toilets of homes and public buildings began to connect directly to the great Cloaca Maxima, that vast stone artery pulsing beneath the city's cobbled streets. Built first to drain marshes and prevent flooding, the cloaca evolved into a lifeline of urban sanitation, drawing waste from latrines through terracotta conduits and stone arches. The system was a marvel not of luxury, but of maintenance, a self-cleaning masterpiece powered by the unhurried flow of water. In some of Rome's grander bathhouses, one could hear the muffled gurgle of this subterranean network, a reminder that even the most elegant architecture depended on what lay unseen. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact. The name Cloaca Maxima means the greatest drain, and despite its humble purpose, parts of it still exist today, quietly enduring beneath the modern city. It is perhaps one of the few monuments to cleanliness that has lasted for over 2 millennia. With unhurried calm, our journey continues east once more. To China, around 5,500 years before our time, where the art of ceramic chamber pots reached a new level of refinement. These vessels, shaped on the potter's wheel and fired to smooth perfection, were used not only in private homes but also in administrative compounds. Their rounded forms and glazed interiors made them easier to clean and more resistant to odor, showing an understanding of hygiene both practical and aesthetic. Many were simple, cream or pale brown, but some were ornamented with faint designs, suggesting that even utility could carry beauty. The potters who made them balanced chemistry and craftsmanship, adjusting clay composition and firing temperature to achieve a smooth, non-porous surface. There is something soothing in that image, the slow turning of a wheel, the soft hiss of glaze against fire, the quiet pride in a vessel meant for everyday use. And then, like a slow ripple in the long river of history, we drift southward to the Indian subcontinent, around 5,000 years before our time, where the concept of the flush toilet, already seen in the far older Indus Valley, re-emerged in urban complexes once again. In these ancient structures, stone or brick latrines were connected to narrow water channels that carried waste away into covered drains. Gravity and gentle water flow worked together, much like in the systems of Harappa long before. The design was thoughtful, durable, and so far ahead of its time that it would not be truly matched until modern centuries. Within these quiet networks of clay and stone, water whispered through civilization, performing its tireless, cleansing task. And though no written record praises these engineers or the households they served, their ingenuity lingers beneath the surface of time, steady, humble, and endlessly patient, like the water that carried their dreams away. And still, we drift onward, to other places, and other centuries, where the same gentle human desire, to stay clean, to build with care, to shape comfort from clay and stone, would continue to unfold, softly, unhurriedly, through the long story of sanitation. It was around 1.5 centuries before our time when the city of Rome, ever so fond of its grand constructions and organized living, began to experiment with a most curious civic invention, public latrines with smooth stone seats, neatly arranged in long rows like quiet amphitheaters of necessity. These spaces, surprisingly social by nature, allowed citizens to relieve themselves in the company of others while water trickled continuously below, whisking waste away into hidden channels. It spoke of Rome's enduring fascination with order and flow, a civilization determined to master not just the architecture of temples and forums, but also the humble, invisible systems that sustained its daily rhythm. Beneath the city's marble splendor ran an intricate web of aqueducts and drains, a silent reminder that even the smallest details of comfort were woven into Rome's grand design of cleanliness and civic pride. A few decades later, in the lands of Greece around 100 years before our time, another quiet refinement emerged, the thoughtful integration of drainage systems directly into public toilets. The Greeks, always inclined toward balance and harmony, considered sanitation an extension of civic virtue. Their designs were simpler than Rome's but graceful in concept: sloped floors, running water channeled through clay pipes, and careful attention to odor control using natural ventilation. This understated elegance turned practicality into philosophy, the idea that even the unseen parts of a city should reflect human reason and beauty. The same engineers who calculated temple proportions also pondered how to carry waste away with dignity, proving that cleanliness and geometry shared a certain poetry. As we drift closer to about 50 years before our time, the Romans once again widened their ambitions. Their growing empire required larger and more efficient sewage networks to serve swelling populations. Beneath the bustle of marketplaces and the clatter of sandals, great stone channels carried wastewater toward the Cloaca Maxima, the vast central sewer whose name meant simply the greatest drain. Its tunnels, some tall enough for a person to walk through, symbolized more than utility; they represented control over nature's untidy cycles. To the Romans, mastery of water, whether through baths, fountains, or sewers, was proof of civilization's triumph over chaos. And so, the expansion of these channels was not merely engineering, it was a quiet assertion that human design could coexist with the Earth's own flowing patterns. Then came the dawn of our era, when in the lands of China, around the first year of our time, clever builders began to improve their privy designs with thoughtful wooden seats and early versions of water channels. The idea was simple but ingenious: to make the experience cleaner, more comfortable, and less exposed to the elements. In certain households, wooden planks were smoothed to fit the human form, while bamboo pipes directed flowing water beneath. The concept reflected the Chinese philosophy of balance, between the body and nature, between stillness and motion. Sanitation, too, became part of harmony, quietly aligned with the same principles that guided gardens, homes, and temples. By roughly 50 years into our time, Rome had reached the height of its sanitary confidence. Great public latrines, capable of seating dozens of citizens at once, became as much a social gathering space as a utility. There, amid carved stone seats and gurgling water channels, senators and shopkeepers might sit side by side, discussing politics or business as water flowed ceaselessly beneath them. The architecture itself invited conversation, open, communal, and entirely unembarrassed. It was hygiene as a social ritual, the mundane turned civic. The constant presence of water symbolized purity and movement, as though the empire itself depended on keeping things, both literal and metaphorical, in motion. By around 100 years of our time, the distinction between baths and toilets had begun to blur. In many Roman bathhouses, toilets were built directly into the complex, connected to the same running water systems that heated the pools and supplied the fountains. Cleanliness was not an afterthought but a holistic pursuit, a cycle of purification that touched every layer of daily life. The baths themselves, with their steaming calderia and cool plunge pools, became symbols of the Roman ideal: body and city both washed, refreshed, and renewed by the same thoughtful engineering. And beneath it all, the unseen pipes and drains whispered the quiet genius of their creators. Around 150 years into our time, another corner of the world, China once more, saw the refinement of ceramic toilets within the homes of the wealthy. These elegant creations, glazed and polished, represented both status and progress. To sit upon such craftsmanship was to participate in civilization's ongoing dialogue with cleanliness and comfort. The use of fired clay, durable and easy to wash, showed how material innovation could meet human need with artistry. These early ceramic fixtures would, in time, inspire future designs across cultures, as the simple desire for hygiene evolved into an aesthetic of refinement. By roughly 200 years into our time, Rome had achieved a sophisticated feat of engineering, connecting toilets, baths, and fountains alike to a complex network of lead and terracotta pipes that drew water from aqueducts stretching across miles of countryside. Every villa, barracks, and bathhouse became part of a living system, pulsing with the rhythm of flowing water. Yet beneath the marvel lay an irony: the same lead that carried life-sustaining water also carried silent danger, seeping slowly into the empire's veins. Still, the innovation itself stood as one of humanity's great infrastructural triumphs, showing how far the desire for cleanliness could shape entire landscapes. And somewhere around 250 years into our time, the ingenuity of India quietly joined this long conversation of sanitation. In urban settlements, builders began crafting toilets with drainage systems designed specifically for water disposal, a thoughtful adaptation to local climate and community needs. These early designs echoed lessons from the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro, where even millennia earlier, streets had been neatly aligned with brick-lined drains. It was as if the idea of cleanliness had never truly vanished, only drifted gently from one culture to another, taking new forms as it flowed, like water itself, patient and eternal, shaping the course of civilization one quiet improvement at a time. It was somewhere around 300 years into our time when the Romans, ever resourceful in their pursuit of cleanliness, adopted a curious little implement known as the tersorium, a communal sponge fixed to a stick, kept in jars of gently flowing water or vinegar between uses. In the vast stone latrines that lined Roman streets, citizens would sit side by side on cool marble seats, the sound of murmured conversation mingling with the soft rush of water beneath. Cleanliness, in this shared setting, was a ritual of routine and practicality rather than privacy. The tersorium, though humble, represented a kind of trust, a shared tool maintained by the rhythm of running water, a reflection of Rome's belief that order, even in sanitation, was a mark of civilization. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the sponge itself was often made from sea varieties imported from the Mediterranean, prized for their softness and natural absorbency. Its presence in the public latrine was both practical and symbolic, a small but telling detail in Rome's grand orchestration of hygiene, where even waste became part of an orderly, flowing system. And then, gliding softly eastward to the lands of China around 3.5 centuries into our time, the design of privies took on a different, more domestic charm. Here, builders began to favor removable waste containers, an elegant solution that allowed waste to be collected, emptied, and sometimes even used as agricultural fertilizer. In densely populated towns, this design meant that cleanliness could be maintained without complex underground systems. The removable containers, often crafted from wood or ceramic, were tucked discreetly beneath seated structures and replaced as needed. This approach reflected a philosophy of balance, between human needs and nature's cycles, between waste and renewal. It was not yet the closed plumbing systems of later centuries, but it was thoughtful, sustainable, and quietly ingenious. One could imagine the calm rhythm of attendants tending to these containers at dawn, maintaining the delicate equilibrium of urban life long before pipes and pumps reshaped the world. By around 400 years into our time, Rome still clung to its remarkable urban traditions, the stone-seated public toilets now woven into nearly every corner of city life. These facilities were crafted from smooth limestone or marble, the seats carved with crescent-shaped openings, spaced evenly along benches that might stretch for several meters. Beneath them ran steady channels of water, fed by aqueducts that had become the lifeblood of the empire. The constant motion of water was both cleansing and comforting, a background rhythm that soothed the senses amid the chatter and footsteps of the public baths and marketplaces nearby. Though time would soon bring decay to these systems, for a moment in history, the Roman city was a symphony of water, from fountains and baths to sewers and latrines, each part flowing into the next in a graceful cycle of use and renewal. As centuries drifted gently onward, by around 4.5 centuries into our time, much of Europe began to take on a different rhythm. With the fading of Roman urban infrastructure came simpler, more rustic solutions, the early medieval pit latrine. These were shallow excavations dug within castle grounds or rural settlements, often lined with wood or stone, and covered for privacy with planks or simple seats. Though lacking the elegance of Rome's marble or the cleverness of China's removable containers, these latrines suited their environment, self-contained, practical, and easily maintained by those living close to the earth. The air around castles would carry the faint, organic scent of these pits, a reminder of life's earthy cycles in a time before running water was a certainty. Hygiene became a personal, rather than civic, matter, no longer shared in marble halls, but quietly tended behind thick stone walls. Around 500 years into our time, Chinese households once again stepped ahead in refinement. Within the homes of merchants and scholars, porcelain chamber pots began to appear, beautifully glazed, elegantly shaped, and carefully stored beneath carved furniture or inside wooden chests. These objects were not merely containers but works of craft, combining artistry with everyday need. The smooth, non-porous surface of porcelain made cleaning easier, and its cool sheen lent a sense of quiet dignity to domestic sanitation. In cities where water and waste were carefully managed by night soil collectors, these chamber pots represented the union of function and grace. Each vessel was a small triumph of material science, an early glimpse of the modern bathroom's delicate balance between beauty and utility. And somewhere around 5.5 centuries into our time, in the heart of the Middle East, urban planners began to integrate early sewer systems directly into the design of their cities. These systems, often constructed beneath thriving trade centers such as those of the Sasanian Empire and later Islamic settlements, reflected a profound respect for cleanliness and civic organization. Water from aqueducts and wells was channeled with care, and waste flowed away through underground conduits built of stone and clay. In warmer climates, where disease could spread easily, these systems represented a quiet revolution, invisible but vital arteries sustaining urban life. The use of running water for both ritual washing and sanitation showed how deeply intertwined spiritual purity and practical hygiene had become in this region. The hum of water beneath the streets was both an offering to health and a testament to human ingenuity. By roughly 600 years into our time, as Rome's old aqueducts fell into disrepair and the empire's vast cities began to crumble, the great sewer systems that once sustained them followed suit. Without regular maintenance, channels clogged, and running water grew scarce. In their place arose the pit latrine once more, simple, functional, and close to the earth. The grandeur of marble seats and flowing drains faded into memory, replaced by quiet wooden structures set over shallow pits. Yet, even in this decline, one could sense a strange continuity, a persistence of need and adaptation. Humanity had always found ways to manage its waste, whether through stone, clay, water, or earth. The fall of the Roman sewers was not the end of sanitation but the beginning of a slower, humbler age of invention. And then, by about 6.5 centuries into our time, the castles of Europe began to sprout curious architectural appendages, narrow stone projections that jutted outward over moats or pits, known as garderobes. These medieval toilets combined practicality with a touch of defensive cleverness. Waste dropped directly into the waters or depths below, keeping the castle interior dry and the smell carried away by open air. The name garderobe, meaning to guard one's robes, came from the practice of hanging clothes near these shafts, where the ammonia in the air deterred moths and lice. It was sanitation and wardrobe care, all in one. Though primitive by Roman standards, these structures possessed a quiet elegance, suspended between the sky and the earth. They allowed nature to do the work of disposal. One could imagine, in the stillness of a stone tower, the faint echo of water beneath and the gentle sigh of wind through the chute, an enduring reminder that even amid stone and armor, life's simplest needs continued, patient as time itself. It was around 700 years into our time, in the elegant hush of China's Tang dynasty, that the art of sanitation reached a quiet kind of beauty. Within the halls of imperial residences, where silk curtains stirred in the breeze and lantern light pooled gently on tiled floors, ceramic toilet bowls began to take shape, smooth, glazed, and cool to the touch. These early designs, crafted with the same mastery that went into porcelain vases and tea sets, were more than just practical conveniences. They were reflections of harmony, of the belief that cleanliness was not merely physical but spiritual. Water, drawn from carefully engineered systems, was sometimes used to flush waste away, a silent and continuous flow that mirrored the gentle balance of nature itself. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, some of these ceramic bowls were molded with curving edges designed for comfort, proof that even in the smallest of details, artisans of the Tang court sought to perfect the relationship between the human form and the tools of daily life. In the soft candlelight of a palace chamber, the simple act of using a toilet might have felt almost meditative, a private moment woven into the larger philosophy of order, purity, and flow that shaped so much of Chinese thought. Drifting gently westward, by around 7.5 centuries into our time, the Middle East was flourishing under the Abbasid Caliphate, and with it came another leap in urban sanitation. In cities such as Baghdad, where narrow streets led to bustling markets and courtyards shimmered with fountains, some urban homes and bathhouses began connecting toilets to small channels of flowing water. These channels carried waste discreetly away, merging into larger drains that kept neighborhoods cleaner and more livable than most of their European counterparts. The principle was simple but brilliant: to let water, that ever-patient sculptor of landscapes, handle the burden of waste. In the warm air of desert cities, this innovation transformed comfort into a quiet luxury. And just as in the ritual washing of hands and feet before prayer, water remained central to the rhythm of daily purity. One might imagine, in the stillness of night, the faint trickle of water beneath stone, unseen, uncelebrated, yet sustaining a sense of dignity and health in every household it touched. As the centuries continued to unfold, around 800 years into our time, Europe's centers of learning and faith began to build their own forms of sanitation, humble, yet deeply symbolic. In monasteries and churches, garderobes were constructed along outer walls, their chutes leading down into pits or sometimes directly into rivers or moats below. These structures, narrow and often dimly lit, carried an austere practicality. The monks who tended the grounds understood the importance of order and cleanliness as part of spiritual discipline. Waste was carried away by gravity and water, echoing the slow flow of time itself. The sound of dripping water or the rustle of straw placed for insulation might have filled these stone passages, reminders that even the holiest of places depended upon such quiet, earthly systems. But first, a small, reflective pause. To note that these garderobes were not merely conveniences but architectural expressions of medieval ingenuity, carefully placed for ventilation, often shared, and built with the same stone that formed the sacred walls of prayer. Around 8.5 centuries into our time, back in China's growing cities, the integration of privies with drainage systems marked another serene step forward. In dense neighborhoods, where wooden homes leaned gracefully toward narrow streets, builders began connecting household toilets with covered drains, allowing waste to flow into managed collection areas or waterways beyond the city walls. This innovation reflected an increasingly urban rhythm of life, a need to balance comfort with community health. In places like Kaifeng and Hangzhou, where markets buzzed with poets, traders, and scholars, sanitation became a subtle thread in the tapestry of daily civilization. Even in the hum of city life, the act of keeping one's surroundings clean was seen as a quiet virtue, an unspoken agreement between person and place. Water, again, was at the center, both a cleanser and a connector, winding through the underbelly of the city like a calm, invisible river. By roughly 900 years into our time, Europe's castles began to evolve their garderobes into more refined forms. Wooden seats were added atop stone shafts, creating a gentler experience for those who lived within the cold stone walls. These improvements, though small, were signs of growing attention to comfort and hygiene among the nobility. Some garderobes even featured ventilation shafts or drainage designed to carry away odors, a mark of thoughtful adaptation in a time still governed by simplicity. Imagine the hush of a medieval chamber at dusk, tapestries swaying softly, a fire crackling nearby, and hidden behind thick walls, a wooden seat warmed by candlelight. The contrast between the grandeur of a feast hall and the quiet solitude of the garderobe was striking, yet both spoke to the same truth, that every layer of life, from ceremony to necessity, carried its own kind of refinement. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting detail, the waste from these castle latrines sometimes fed moat ecosystems, unintentionally supporting aquatic plants and small fish that thrived on the nutrients below. Even without knowing it, medieval engineers had created tiny, living cycles of reuse and renewal. Then, drifting gently back eastward to around 9.5 centuries into our time, China's cities began to take communal sanitation to new heights. In public markets, where spice sellers and herbalists gathered among steaming food stalls, public latrines were built for common use. These were not crude pits, but carefully managed facilities, often equipped with multiple seats and regular cleaning by attendants. Such systems, recorded in Song dynasty texts, reveal an early form of civic sanitation, a recognition that public health was a shared responsibility. The waste collected here was often repurposed for agriculture, closing the loop between city and countryside. The idea that waste could nourish future harvests turned even the most mundane act into part of a grand, organic cycle. Within these bustling cities, one could sense a deep continuity, the rhythm of life sustained by water, soil, and the patient labor of those who tended to what others preferred not to see. By about 1,000 years into our time, in the towns and growing cities of Europe, the use of stone-lined pit toilets became standard. Craftsmen built small outhouse structures or interior chambers lined with carved stone blocks, designed to prevent collapse and contain odor. In some urban centers, like London or Paris, these latrines even connected to shallow drains or cesspits cleaned by gong farmers, who worked quietly at night to empty and transport waste beyond the city walls. Though humble and laborious, this work was vital, the unseen foundation of urban life. The steady rhythm of sanitation workers, the splash of water poured to rinse a pit, the shuffle of carts in the darkened streets, all part of the slow choreography that kept cities livable long before modern sewers appeared. But first, a soft reflection on how these systems, though primitive, represented something beautifully human, an ongoing conversation with the earth, one that balanced necessity with care. And then, around 1,050 years into our time, China once again brought elegance to utility. Toilets were sometimes integrated with garden water systems, where small channels of flowing water from ponds or streams helped carry away waste. These arrangements turned what might have been unpleasant into something harmoniously natural. In the courtyards of wealthy homes, one could imagine the sound of water trickling through bamboo pipes, feeding koi ponds or irrigating plants after passing through concealed drainage. The system embodied the essence of feng shui, the belief that good flow, in both air and water, supported health and prosperity. Cleanliness was not just a matter of engineering, but of balance between the human and the natural world. The toilet, placed near water yet hidden among greenery, became part of the landscape, a serene fusion of privacy, practicality, and art. Through these quiet innovations, ancient China taught a truth that still lingers gently in modern design, that even the most mundane spaces can become sanctuaries when shaped by thoughtfulness and flow. It was around 1100 years into our time when the stone walls of Europe's medieval castles began to grow taller, and with them came new towers, narrow, vertical spaces known quietly as latrine towers. These were structures built with gravity as their loyal helper, where waste could fall freely down shafts into pits or moats below. They jutted slightly from the main walls, often hidden within the thickness of stone, and yet they were as essential to castle life as the drawbridge or the kitchen fire. Inside, a simple wooden seat was placed over a chute carved through masonry, sometimes lined with straw or moss for comfort. One might imagine the echo of water dripping softly down those chutes, a sound as constant as the wind through the battlements. The air within such towers was cold and heavy, but they were marvels of practicality, ingenious in their simplicity, resilient through centuries. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, some of these latrine towers were strategically built over moats not just for sanitation, but as a subtle form of defense, using the waste-laden water to discourage intruders. Thus, in their own quiet way, they became part of the castle's protection, an accidental fusion of hygiene and warfare, preserved in the stony hush of medieval ingenuity. As we drift gently eastward, around 11.5 centuries into our time, cities of the Middle East were shimmering centers of architecture and science. Here, advanced sewer channels coursed quietly beneath streets paved with limestone and brick. These channels were not mere ditches but carefully constructed conduits, designed to carry waste away with the aid of flowing water. In bustling cities such as Damascus and Baghdad, engineers understood the art of slope and flow, ensuring that gravity moved water steadily through their subterranean arteries. The hum of life above, markets, prayer calls, quiet courtyards shaded with vines, was supported by this hidden, rhythmic pulse below. In some larger homes and bathhouses, the same systems that brought clean water also carried used water away, uniting luxury with sanitation in a loop of quiet logic. And yet, there is something beautifully humble in this design, unseen, uncelebrated, yet vital. These early sewer systems were proof that human comfort and civic harmony had long been connected by the gentle, almost invisible movement of water beneath the earth's surface. Moving softly forward, around 1200 years into our time, towns and monasteries across Europe began to adopt their own variations of latrines, crafted from stone and wood. These were simpler than the grandeur of castle towers but no less important to daily rhythm. In monastic communities, latrines were often built near streams, allowing the slow current to carry waste away, an elegant, natural solution born from observation. Monks, with their patient precision, maintained these structures with care, understanding that cleanliness was a quiet form of devotion. The wooden planks, smooth from use, bore witness to centuries of routine, as each day followed the same measured pace of prayer, work, and rest. In towns, meanwhile, shared latrines became a mark of urban development. People began to think of waste not as something to hide, but as something that required thoughtful management, a shift both practical and philosophical. But first, a soft detour. For an extra curious note, some monasteries built long communal latrine halls, sometimes with up to 20 seats, allowing the monastic community to maintain order even in the most mundane of human activities. The rhythm of daily life, it seemed, was strongest in its quietest moments. Drifting east again to around 12.5 centuries into our time, China's imperial palaces were already enjoying something close to the modern flush toilet. Through ingenious hydraulic designs, water was channeled through small conduits to remove waste automatically, an extraordinary refinement centuries ahead of much of the world. These palace toilets often used bronze fittings and glazed ceramic basins, their surfaces smooth and cool, gleaming in the soft lantern light of Tang and early Song halls. Servants tended to these systems with gentle diligence, ensuring the channels flowed freely, that the small valves and openings did not clog with silt or debris. The sound of trickling water through hidden channels might have been as constant as a heartbeat, quietly sustaining the grandeur above. But first, a soft little pause. For an extra interesting fact, archaeological finds in the city of Shen have revealed ceramic toilets connected to ancient drains that once carried water drawn from palace reservoirs, evidence of early indoor plumbing centuries before it became common in the West. Such details remind us that innovation often unfolds in silence, like water shaping stone, unseen yet enduring. By roughly 1300 years into our time, Europe's growing cities began to establish public toilets connected to rivers or moats, an unrefined but effective way of removing waste. These public latrines were built along bridges, marketplaces, or city gates, often perched above running water. The sound of water below mingled with the faint echo of footsteps and murmurs of conversation, creating a strangely human soundtrack to daily sanitation. Although the systems lacked the sophistication of their Eastern counterparts, they represented a communal understanding of hygiene, rudimentary yet progressive. The rivers that received this waste would, of course, carry it downstream, often to places where it became someone else's problem, yet this was still a step toward organized urban living. But first, a gentle note worth pausing on: in places like Paris and London, the placement of latrines over waterways was both practical and poetic in its simplicity, letting the river's endless motion take away what people preferred to forget. Around 13.5 centuries into our time, China continued to refine the art of cleanliness within its urban homes. Toilets became not only functional but designed with beauty in mind, made from polished ceramics, sometimes with painted details or elegant forms. Urban planners in the Song dynasty treated sanitation as a mark of civilized life, integrating drainage and collection systems into residential neighborhoods. Human waste was even collected systematically for use as fertilizer, closing the cycle between home and field in a way that modern systems only rediscovered millennia later. These designs show a profound harmony between practicality and aesthetic grace, a belief that even private routines could align with artistry. The gentle geometry of porcelain, the soft coolness of tile, and the constant whisper of water through narrow channels turned something ordinary into an act of quiet design. As the soft centuries drifted toward 1400 years into our time, Europe's castles still relied on the familiar garderobes, projecting stone passages that carried waste downward into pits or moats. By this era, the technology had changed little, yet the structures themselves had become symbols of enduring tradition. Each garderobe, tucked behind heavy tapestries or along the outer wall, was an echo of centuries past, proof of how long people could live with something that worked, even imperfectly. The scent of stone, the texture of worn wood, the faint draft of air moving through a chute, all part of an everyday rhythm that connected medieval life across generations. But first, a small reflective pause. To consider how the word garderobe itself once referred to a place where clothes were stored, thought to be protected from moths by the odor of ammonia. A curious intersection of utility and myth, woven gently into the history of daily existence. Then, drifting through the warm breezes of about 14.5 centuries into our time, the Middle East saw private flush-style toilets appear in the homes of the wealthy. These innovations, influenced by earlier systems and refined through new architectural thinking, used gravity-fed water or hand-poured basins to create a soft, consistent flow. In cities like Cairo and Damascus, where the blending of science and comfort was an art, such toilets became signs of prosperity, quietly elegant in both function and form. Artisans crafted stone or ceramic bowls with care, often decorating them subtly, knowing that beauty was not reserved only for what could be seen by guests. The whisper of water against stone, the slow movement through hidden pipes, the delicate balance between cleanliness and modesty, all merged into a tranquil harmony. And in that, one can sense the timeless human desire for both dignity and quiet ease, expressed through the simplest of inventions. By about 1500 years into our time, Europe's homes had shifted toward the widespread use of chamber pots, portable vessels of ceramic, pewter, or even brass, kept near the bedside. These objects, so ordinary and unremarkable, became the center of nightly ritual. In candlelight, the clink of a lid, the cool surface of the pot, and the faint echo of water when emptied at dawn formed a kind of unintentional symphony of domestic life. In cities, chamber pots were emptied into cesspits or the street, a practice tolerated for centuries. Yet, in their humble practicality, They represent an important transition between medieval convenience and the promise of plumbing yet to come. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting note, the term garderobe lingered in use even as chamber pots took over, showing how language, much like design, evolves gently and without hurry, carrying traces of the past in every quiet syllable. There is a kind of quiet elegance to the way the story of sanitation drifts into the middle of the 18th century, when in the softly humming workshops of China, around the year 1550 of our time, ceramic toilets began to be produced in greater numbers. These smooth, carefully shaped vessels, cool to the touch and beautifully glazed, were no longer exclusive treasures of the imperial elite but slowly found their way into the more ordinary homes of scholars, merchants, and city dwellers. The craft of pottery had reached such refinement that a household toilet could be both practical and pleasing to the eye, almost like a small work of art tucked into a corner of domestic life. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, these early ceramic toilets were not all connected to flowing water systems, yet their glazed surfaces made them far easier to clean than the rougher stone or wooden ones of earlier times. Hygiene, in its quiet and humble way, was becoming a visible mark of progress, a reflection of comfort and order valued deeply within Chinese culture. And as these smooth bowls gleamed beneath the muted glow of oil lamps, they whispered of an age that valued beauty even in its most private routines. As the soft centuries rolled onward to around the year 1600 of our time, Europe was finding its own path toward sanitation. Cities were growing tighter, and the stone walls of old towns echoed with the quiet struggle of managing waste in places not designed for so many people. Early toilets were now being linked to cesspits or shallow drainage channels, allowing the waste to flow away, even if imperfectly. It was a modest leap forward, yet a significant one, a sign that society was beginning to think not only of cleanliness but of structure and planning. Beneath the cobblestones, workers dug narrow channels, letting gravity and patience do their work. The sound of trickling water in a dim stone passage became, in its own way, a sign of urban life. And though the air was not always pleasant, the intent was clear, to separate the household from the waste, to give dignity a physical form in clay, wood, and water. And then, around the year 1650 of our time, across the sea in Japan, the rhythm of sanitation took a gentler, more natural turn. In the tidy streets of Edo period cities, wooden toilets were crafted with care, their designs often integrating small water channels to carry waste away. These weren't crude holes but thoughtfully engineered pieces of daily life, shaped by the same aesthetic that guided Japanese architecture and garden design. Many of these early systems made clever use of water flowing from household chores, washing rice or vegetables, to rinse the waste away, creating a kind of circular, respectful relationship with nature. But first, a small detour of thought. The waste itself was not merely discarded but often collected, dried, and used as valuable fertilizer for rice fields. In this way, what left the home returned to the soil, feeding the crops that would sustain the same families. A cycle so elegantly simple that it blurred the line between cleanliness and sustainability, between human need and the patient rhythm of the earth. By the time the 17th century drifted into the 18th, around the year 1700 of our time, Europe had begun to treat comfort as something that belonged even to private spaces. Basic seat covers began to appear, often carved from wood and later padded with fabric, designed not for grandeur but for gentleness. The act of sitting itself was slowly being dignified, elevated from a necessity to an experience of care. Within large manor houses, the chamber pot was no longer just an object of convenience but a piece of personal furniture, sometimes ornately painted, sometimes discreetly hidden behind screens or within cabinets. Hygiene was still imperfect, but the sense of propriety was growing, wrapping daily needs in layers of refinement and privacy. Only a few decades later, around the year 1720 of our time, the air of invention began to stir in European workshops. Tinkerers and engineers, curious about mechanisms and motion, turned their attention to the simplest but most universal of human needs. Early mechanical flushing devices began to appear, rudimentary contraptions of levers, pulleys, and small tanks of water that could be released to wash the bowl clean. These devices were rare, often experimental, yet they embodied a certain optimism, a belief that even this most mundane act could be improved by design. But first, a quiet little detour worth lingering on, the very idea of using water deliberately, not just for cleaning but for disposal, reflected a deeper understanding of hygiene and disease. Though the science was still centuries from maturity, intuition was beginning to stir. The world was starting to connect cleanliness with health, privacy with dignity, and invention with everyday comfort. As the century ripened toward 1750 of our time, the murmur of progress ran beneath the cobbled streets. Urban drainage systems were expanding, channeling waste and stormwater away from homes and into the growing arteries of the city. These were not yet the grand sewer systems that would come later, but they were a beginning, careful networks of stone and clay that gave structure to public health. The smell of stagnant waste began, slowly, to be replaced by the cleaner scent of running water. Beneath the houses of merchants and artisans, water found new paths to flow, guided by gravity and curiosity alike. It was a quiet revolution of comfort, one measured not in grand architecture but in the slow disappearance of odors and the gentle hum of a cleaner life. And then, with a small but decisive sound of progress, the year 1775 of our time brought forth a turning point in England. A watchmaker named Alexander Cumming patented the first true S-shaped water closet, a graceful curve in the pipe that held water like a seal, keeping foul air from creeping back into the room. It was a moment of quiet genius, born not from luxury but from practicality, and it would change sanitation forever. That simple curve, often unnoticed today, became a silent guardian of cleanliness, a mechanical sigh between the home and the unseen world beneath it. But first, an extra little note of fascination. Cumming's design reflected an age obsessed with the precision of movement, where even a toilet could echo the ingenuity of clockwork. The balance of pressure, the seal of water, the delicate flow, all played their part in a symphony of quiet engineering. Just a few years later, by around 1780 of our time, these water closets began appearing in the homes of the wealthy, their presence as much a mark of sophistication as of hygiene. To own one was to belong to a new era, an era where cleanliness and convenience walked hand in hand. The sound of a flush became a symbol of modernity, a whisper of progress behind closed doors. And as the century drew gently toward 1790 of our time, French inventors joined the movement, refining the flushing mechanisms to make them smoother, quieter, and more reliable. The age of invention had entered the most private corners of human life, and even there, in porcelain and polished brass, the quiet pulse of civilization could be heard, steady, patient, and ever flowing forward. There is something quietly elegant about the turn of the 19th century, around the year 1800 of our time, when England's towns and cities began to hum with a new rhythm of cleanliness. The improved water closet, once a curiosity of the privileged, was becoming a familiar fixture in urban homes. The invention of the S-shaped water seal, the refinement of valves, and the steady improvement in materials turned what had once been an awkward luxury into a reliable household companion. The very idea of pressing a lever and hearing water sweep away what had once been left to buckets or cesspits carried a kind of wonder. In candlelit houses and terraced streets, the hush of a flushing toilet became a small sound of modern progress, subtle, almost secret, yet deeply transformative. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, many early English homes still relied on shared facilities and small courtyards, yet the notion of private sanitation was growing as a dream of comfort, as vital to the modern household as light or warmth. Beneath the polished brass fittings and porcelain bowls, a quiet revolution in hygiene was unfolding, one that would ripple outward through all of Europe. And so, As the years drifted softly forward to around 1810 of our time, another small but important improvement shimmered into being: the introduction of iron cisterns. These sturdy containers, often mounted high upon walls and connected by gleaming pipes, provided a consistent, controlled rush of water each time the chain was pulled. The sound of iron and water mingling became a kind of music in the background of daily life. Engineers and craftsmen found joy in the precision of the mechanism, the smooth rise and fall of the float, the careful balance of pressure that made the flush both efficient and silent. But first, a gentle thought worth pausing on: the iron cistern was not merely a technical upgrade, it was an expression of confidence in the infrastructure of cities. It meant that water could be stored, delivered, and trusted. The cold gleam of the metal represented the age's fascination with durability, with control, and with the steady hum of progress. By around 1820 of our time, another quiet name joined the story: Joseph Bramah, an English inventor whose improved valve design refined the very heart of the water closet. His device allowed the flow of water to be precisely managed, sealing odors below and ensuring a clean, reliable flush above. It was a triumph of simple mechanics, shaped by an engineer's patience and the curiosity of a craftsman. Bramah's toilets became sought after across England, installed in ships, estates, and even royal residences. And yet, there was something almost poetic about their construction: heavy wood, polished brass, and soft leather seals working together in quiet harmony. But first, a slow little detour into texture. These early toilets were handmade, their handles cool and satisfying to the touch, their cisterns filled with the sound of waiting water. Each use was a small act of faith in engineering, a symbol of a world increasingly guided by human ingenuity. The years drifted onward, and by around 1830 of our time, much of Europe was catching up to this modern pulse. Cities like Paris, Vienna, and Berlin began integrating toilets into their growing plumbing systems. Underground, a latticework of pipes expanded beneath the streets, carrying waste and water through carefully designed channels. It was not glamorous work, but it was foundational, a hidden infrastructure upon which the health of millions depended. The toilets above, shining in porcelain and brass, were only the visible tip of a vast and humming system. But first, a quiet pause for reflection. For the first time in history, waste was being managed on a scale that touched entire cities. The air grew cleaner, the spread of disease slower, and the rhythm of life a little more orderly. Beneath every street corner, water and waste now traveled in silent cooperation, an invisible ballet of cleanliness and design. By around 1840 of our time, across the ocean in the young cities of the United States, the first indoor toilets began to appear in the grand homes of the wealthy. These were not yet common features but symbols of refinement, installed in mansions where water could be piped from private wells or new municipal systems. The rooms themselves were often decorated with marble basins, ornate wallpaper, and small windows to let in the morning light. To have an indoor toilet was to join a select group, those who lived at the intersection of luxury and progress. Yet, even in these opulent settings, the early systems were imperfect. Water pressure varied, leaks were common. But first, a quiet detour into practicality. Servants often maintained the new devices, keeping valves oiled and tanks refilled, while architects debated how best to ventilate these curious new water rooms. And so, amid the clinking of silver and the creak of carriages, the quiet sound of running water became a gentle symbol of modern grace. By around 1850 of our time, England once again led a new transformation, this time, not within the home but out in the streets. Public toilets with flushing mechanisms were installed in busy city centers, giving travelers, workers, and tradespeople access to facilities once reserved for the private sphere. The first of these appeared in London, often beautifully tiled, with polished brass fittings and attendants who kept them spotless. A penny gained you entry, a small price for dignity. These public conveniences, as they were politely called, represented a shift toward collective care in urban life. The sound of flushing water, echoing softly beneath the stone arches of train stations and marketplaces, became a comforting constant amid the bustle. But first, a small, thoughtful pause. These early public restrooms were part of a larger story about equality and access, about the quiet acknowledgement that cleanliness, too, could be a public good. And then, around 1860 of our time, another delicate improvement sealed the modern toilet's fate, the introduction of the S-trap design. This clever curve in the piping used water itself as a barrier against the invisible dangers of sewer gases, ensuring that air flowed in only one direction. It was simple, elegant, and profoundly important. With it, the modern sanitary system was complete in its essentials, a fusion of form, function, and foresight. The S-trap's quiet arc became the invisible guardian of the modern home, holding back not just odor but disease. But first, one more slow little detour. The air that rose from sewers had long been blamed for the spread of illness, and though the true causes lay elsewhere, the protection offered by the S-trap gave people comfort and health in equal measure. Beneath every floorboard, in the silence between flushes, this small loop of pipe held the line between chaos and calm, between the world above and the unseen labyrinth below. There is a certain quiet fascination in how the simplest rituals of living, like the act of using a toilet, carry the deep hum of civilization's progress. Around the year 1870 of our time, in the growing cities of the United States, the sound of water moving through hidden pipes began to replace the rustle of chamber pots and the long, cold walk to outdoor privies. Indoor toilets, once the luxury of the wealthy, began to appear more often in urban homes, quietly transforming domestic life. It was not only a matter of comfort, though comfort played a gentle role, it was a revolution of sanitation, of dignity, of the private space becoming truly private. The walls of homes, once porous with the smells and sounds of daily necessity, became cleaner, quieter, more sealed against the outer world. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the earliest adopters of indoor toilets often faced skepticism. Many believed that bringing such plumbing indoors would cause disease, not prevent it, a strange irony in hindsight, considering it was the very beginning of modern hygiene. Drifting softly into the next decade, around the year 1880 of our time, a more delicate kind of beauty began to flow into this story, the birth of mass-produced porcelain toilets in Europe. Porcelain, with its smooth, luminous surface, seemed to carry cleanliness in its very nature. It replaced the rough iron and wood of earlier designs with something bright, light, and almost serene. Factories in places like Staffordshire, England, began producing toilets with consistent shapes, gleaming finishes, and elegant curves that made washing and maintenance easier. This wasn't just industrial progress, it was aesthetic evolution. Bathrooms, once hidden corners, slowly began to claim a form of quiet grace. The growing middle class could afford a touch of refinement, and the flush toilet was no longer just a device, it became a symbol of progress, of modernity, of belonging to a world that was becoming ever more ordered and clean. By the time we reach around the year 1890 of our time, the hum of city life in the United States had become almost mechanical in its rhythm: streetcars, telegraphs, steam whistles, and now, standardized plumbing joined that chorus. Toilets were no longer improvised or custom-built but manufactured to fit into uniform systems of water and waste. Pipes connected buildings like arteries, valves and traps became silent guardians of public health. What had once been an individual household solution turned into a collective network of sanitation, a hidden infrastructure of cleanliness threading beneath the streets. Engineers and urban planners spoke in new languages of flow and pressure, turning something invisible into the beating heart of a city's well-being. The flush became an everyday miracle: pull a lever, and the unwanted vanished, whisked away to somewhere unseen, leaving behind only a sense of relief and quiet marvel at how smoothly it all worked. When the dawn of the new century arrived, Around the year 1900 of our time, both Europe and the United States had entered what could gently be called the era of the modern flush. Homes across towns and cities began to feature toilets not as rare fixtures, but as standard necessities, unspoken symbols of civilization's progress. Public health improved as waste management systems became more sophisticated, and waterborne diseases, once rampant in crowded districts, began to retreat. The design of toilets grew both practical and poetic, each curve and chamber calculated to channel water perfectly, each handle a tiny gesture toward ease. For many families, having an indoor flush toilet was as much a sign of arrival in the modern world as owning electric light or a telephone. The once awkward subject of waste, once whispered about behind closed doors, became quietly managed through the steady perfection of engineering. A gentle shift came again around the year 1910 of our time, when Europe saw the introduction of tank-type water closets, an elegant refinement in the ongoing story of cleanliness. These designs used a gravity-fed tank positioned above the bowl, releasing water with just the right force to clear waste efficiently without excess. It was a balance of art and physics, beautifully simple, profoundly effective. The tank's quiet presence above the user carried the memory of Victorian ornament but hinted at a sleeker, more utilitarian age approaching. It also made toilets more water efficient, a small but meaningful step toward sustainable design long before that word was common. But first, a slow detour through thought itself. The tank toilet wasn't just about engineering, it was about control. The mastery of flow, the taming of water, the idea that even nature's most unpredictable element could be harnessed gently for human order. By the time we drift into the year 1920 of our time, the United States had begun refining toilets for efficiency and comfort. Manufacturers experimented with bowl shapes, seat heights, and water volumes, gradually crafting what might be called the ergonomics of everyday relief. The focus moved toward quiet operation, smoother flushing, and easier cleaning. In design catalogs, toilets began to appear beside bathtubs and sinks as part of an integrated domestic environment, the birth of the modern bathroom as a coordinated, thoughtfully arranged space. It was no longer a corner of necessity, but a room of calm routine, of private rituals that reflected both modern science and quiet pleasure. Advertisements of the era spoke of comfort, sanitation, and refinement, words that had once belonged to salons and parlors, now applied to plumbing. In Europe, around the year 1930 of our time, porcelain seat designs became standardized, marking a curious but essential moment in the evolution of hygiene. The idea that even the seat itself could be improved for cleanliness, durability, and universal fit reflected how deeply the concept of sanitation had taken root. The gleaming white finish became symbolic, a visual cue of purity and health. The curvature of the seat, the thickness of the glaze, the precision of the fittings, all were calibrated to create a feeling of effortless maintenance, of smoothness, of things staying quietly clean with little effort. There was something almost philosophical in this devotion to detail, the notion that cleanliness was not just a habit but a state of mind, a small act of civilization renewed every morning and every evening. And softly, almost imperceptibly, around the year 1940 of our time, the flush toilet entered a new stage of refinement in the United States. Engineers introduced improved siphon mechanisms and more efficient water flow systems, ensuring cleaner flushes with less noise and waste. The war years brought material shortages, but also ingenuity. Necessity led to innovation. Designs became simpler, yet smarter, with parts that could be replaced easily and systems that used fewer resources. The toilet, humble, overlooked, indispensable, had reached a form so perfected it would endure almost unchanged for decades. It had become part of the quiet architecture of modern life, invisible, reliable, serene in its purpose. And somewhere, beneath the sound of pipes and the whisper of running water, was the faint echo of every century before, of humanity's endless, slow dance with cleanliness, comfort, and the calm mastery of its own environment. Around the year 1950 of our time, in homes across Europe, the quiet hum of domestic life carried with it a new detail: the widespread adoption of low-level tanks in household toilets. These tanks, positioned close to the bowl rather than perched high above, represented a subtle shift in both design and convenience. Water could now flow with a gentle rush, guided by gravity in a more immediate way, reducing the wait for a full flush, and allowing the user to witness the smooth, nearly silent movement of water as it completed its task. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the low-level tank also allowed toilets to be installed in smaller spaces, tucked unobtrusively into corners or alongside walls, a quiet accommodation of urban living and architectural constraints. It was a practical elegance, a thoughtful rebalancing of function and form. In homes where children were learning the routines of daily life, the low-level tank made it easier to reach the flush lever, a small gesture of inclusion and usability. It was as though toilets were quietly shaping themselves to the rhythm of human life, without fuss or ceremony, just a gentle adaptation to the changing needs of households across the continent. Drifting softly toward the following decade, around 1960 of our time, Japan introduced what would later be regarded as the first truly high-tech toilets, complete with features that whispered of comfort and personal care: bidet functions, heated seats, and meticulous water controls. These devices combined ingenuity, cultural attentiveness, and engineering precision in ways that were, for the time, quietly revolutionary. A heated seat, for instance, seemed almost trivial, and yet it transformed the simple act of sitting into a gentle, warming experience, particularly during cold winters. The bidet function added a layer of cleanliness that was both precise and soothing, as water, temperature-controlled and directed, attended to the user with silent care. But first, a quiet little detour. For this extra interesting fact, these early high-tech toilets often included sensors, delicate mechanisms that allowed the lids to rise or fall without touch, anticipating human movement with almost imperceptible sensitivity. The toilets of Japan were becoming interactive companions in the household, not simply inert objects. The elegance of design, the whisper of electronics, and the thoughtful integration of water, heat, and movement all coalesced to create something profoundly ordinary yet quietly luxurious, a new milestone in the slow unfolding story of human sanitation. By around the year 1970 of our time, in various corners of Europe, water-saving toilet designs began to emerge, reflecting an awareness of resource management that moved beyond comfort alone. Engineers and designers experimented with reduced water volumes, more efficient bowl geometries, and controlled flushing mechanisms, all intended to achieve the same hygienic effect while conserving precious resources. But first, a gentle pause. For this extra interesting fact, some early designs relied on two-stage flushes, a delicate balance between small and large volumes, almost like a quiet musical rhythm of water flowing in measured intervals. Urban planners and environmental thinkers quietly admired these innovations, recognizing that even the simplest fixture in a home could participate in a larger ecological narrative. Toilets became, almost imperceptibly, both functional and responsible, a silent testimony to human ingenuity applied not only to ease but also to stewardship. The quiet curves of bowls, the gentle arcs of water, and the subtle mechanisms controlling flow all harmonized to achieve efficiency, creating an unobtrusive elegance that was as practical as it was mundane. Households that adopted these designs found themselves participating in a larger, unseen network of water conservation, contributing quietly to the urban ecosystem without fuss or fanfare. By the time the year 1980 of our time had arrived in the United States, pressure-assisted toilets began to appear in public and private buildings, introducing a mechanical nuance that improved flushing performance. These toilets, often heavier and louder than their gravity-fed cousins, relied on compressed air to enhance the flow of water, ensuring that even large volumes of waste could be removed cleanly and efficiently. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Pressure-assisted mechanisms were especially valued in commercial settings, where multiple users and high traffic demanded reliability and speed, yet their installation also required careful attention to pipe sizing, tank construction, and maintenance. The technology was a quiet triumph of applied physics, turning air and water into a partnership, working together in silence beneath the polished porcelain. Urban facilities, hospitals, and schools began adopting these systems, finding a steady assurance in the predictable flush and the cleanliness it maintained. There was a subtle poetry in the interplay of pressure, water, and gravity, a rhythm largely unnoticed but profoundly felt, a quiet orchestration of engineering and domestic necessity that shaped the environment in a gentle, enduring way. Around the year 1990 of our time, the global market saw a slow but noticeable shift toward eco-friendly and dual-flush toilets, quietly signaling an emerging international consciousness around water use and conservation. These designs offered two options, a smaller flush for liquid waste and a larger flush for solid waste, allowing households to calibrate water use almost imperceptibly according to need. But first, a soft little detour. For this extra interesting fact, dual-flush toilets required careful valve calibration, precise lever mechanics, and bowl geometry tuned to conserve water without sacrificing cleanliness, an elegant compromise between efficiency and hygiene. Designers in Australia, Europe, and North America worked quietly to standardize these mechanisms, ensuring that the subtle control of water could become an everyday habit. Eco-conscious consumers, whether in single-family homes or apartments, participated in a gentle rhythm of conservation, each flush a nearly invisible contribution to resource management. The dual-flush system, in its quiet, functional poetry, transformed the ordinary act of using a toilet into a mindful engagement with the world, a slow meditation in water economy that few noticed but many benefited from, leaving the world just a little cleaner, a little more orderly, and profoundly calm in its gentle utility. Drifting softly into the dawn of the new millennium, around the year 2000 of our time, Japan introduced smart toilets with automated lids, self-cleaning features, and comprehensive cleansing systems, a quiet marvel of engineering and user comfort. These devices combine sensors, heated elements, bidet functions, and automatic water management into a cohesive, nearly silent ritual, making the simple act of using the toilet an orchestrated experience of precision and cleanliness. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, early adopters noted that the smart toilets reduced manual cleaning, improved hygiene for households, and offered nuanced control over temperature, water pressure, and spray direction, merging convenience with subtle luxury. The lid would rise gently as a user approached, the seat heated in anticipation, and after use, a gentle wash in warm air drying would follow. It was the quiet integration of electronics, water flow, and ergonomic design, a combination of comfort and science wrapped in porcelain. Households across Japan began to treat these devices as essential companions, blending modernity with the domestic ritual, a slow, thoughtful evolution of human sanitation that transformed a mundane act into an almost meditative routine. By around the year 2005 of our time, water-efficient toilets were increasingly adopted globally, quietly reshaping domestic plumbing to reduce consumption without sacrificing functionality. The designs refined earlier innovations in dual flush and smart toilets, incorporating low-flow valves, improved bowl shapes, and optimized siphon mechanisms. But first, a gentle detour. For this extra interesting fact, the calculations for water efficiency were painstaking, requiring fluid dynamics expertise, precise modeling of waste and water volume, and careful testing to ensure the quiet removal of waste in every scenario. Homeowners across continents participated in a subtle network of conservation, each flush an imperceptible contribution to environmental stewardship. And so, even in this most ordinary and overlooked fixture, the toilet, human ingenuity, patience, and an attention to detail converged in service of both comfort and the planet, leaving the world quietly cleaner, smoother, and more thoughtfully ordered than before. Around the year 2010 of our time, in various corners of Europe, toilet design quietly evolved to integrate sensors that attended to both hygiene and efficiency, a subtle orchestration of technology and domestic routine. These sensors, delicate and unobtrusive, detected human presence, measured water levels, and often guided automatic flushing sequences, allowing the user to move through the necessary rituals of sanitation without conscious effort. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the sensors required careful calibration, as even the gentlest misalignment could trigger a premature flush or leave the bowl still, emphasizing the quiet precision engineers applied to seemingly mundane household tasks. In homes, offices, and public spaces, these devices subtly transformed the relationship between the human body and the porcelain fixture, offering a touchless experience that was simultaneously practical and reassuring. The integration of sensor technology allowed toilets to conserve water by ensuring flushes occurred only when necessary, reducing waste in a gentle, almost imperceptible rhythm. As water moved with measured, efficient flow, it seemed to participate in a quiet choreography of cleanliness, a muted ballet that few noticed, but everyone benefited from. Household routines, morning and evening, were punctuated not by loud interruptions but by the soft, consistent hum of technological mindfulness, turning an everyday activity into a subtle interaction with careful engineering and thoughtful design. In this way, toilets became silent partners in domestic life, quietly attentive and unobtrusively aware, blending function, hygiene, and efficiency into the ordinary cadence of human living. Drifting softly toward the year 2015 of our time, Japan continued to refine its already remarkable smart toilets, now incorporating advanced air drying and deodorizing features that elevated the domestic experience to something almost ceremonial in its quiet attentiveness. The air drying, controlled at specific temperatures and flows, allowed the body to complete its hygienic process without contact, a small but profoundly comforting convenience. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the deodorizing features relied on subtle chemical filtration, activated automatically by sensors, capturing odors before they spread, using carefully measured carbon filters or gentle air currents. These toilets, more than merely functional, were orchestrated environments of cleanliness, comfort, and quiet precision, blending warmth, airflow, and subtle fragrance into a coherent and unobtrusive experience. Users could approach and depart without touching a lever, without the conscious act of flushing or wiping, the systems anticipating needs almost imperceptibly. Engineers and designers devoted themselves to optimizing the flow of water, the angle of sprays, the intensity of drying, and the air circulation for maximum efficiency and minimal intrusion. In this gentle, deliberate refinement, technology met human habit in a slow, reflective dance, producing a fixture that was both extraordinarily ordinary and quietly attentive, a silent companion in the rhythm of daily life, a witness to human presence without ever demanding attention. By around the year 2020 of our time, globally, the quiet evolution of toilets began to embrace the pressing necessity of sustainable sanitation, particularly in developing regions where access to clean and hygienic facilities was still limited. These sustainable toilets, often designed with waterless systems, composting mechanisms, or highly efficient flushing technologies, aimed to provide safety, cleanliness, and environmental care simultaneously. But first, a gentle detour. For this extra interesting fact, many designs incorporated separate chambers for liquid and solid waste, or clever ventilation systems that minimized odors while promoting decomposition, allowing communities to maintain sanitation without large-scale water infrastructure. Engineers, anthropologists, and environmental scientists collaborated closely, considering local materials, cultural practices, and climate conditions, to produce solutions that were both practical and respectful. Each installation, while unassuming in appearance, represented a meticulous confluence of design, science, and human need, quietly reducing disease transmission and improving quality of life. Water use was minimized, while waste management became an almost invisible process, performed without fanfare, allowing households and communities to function in both comfort and dignity. The quiet hum of these sustainable toilets, if one listened closely, spoke of thoughtful adaptation, careful observation, and the gentle application of technology to the most ordinary yet essential of human needs. They were simultaneously mundane and profound, ordinary fixtures that shaped health, society, and the environment with soft, deliberate grace. Around the year 2025 of our time, the global household quietly welcomed the introduction of AI-assisted toilets, blending smart home technology, advanced sensors, and water optimization into a single, seamless experience. These toilets monitored usage patterns, adjusted water volume automatically, and even employed cleaning routines calibrated to specific needs, a silent, intelligent presence in the domestic space. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the AI systems incorporated data from multiple sensors, motion, weight, humidity, and even water quality, to optimize performance, reducing waste, maintaining hygiene, and enhancing user comfort without conscious input. Each flush, spray, and self-cleaning cycle was orchestrated by algorithms designed for efficiency and quiet reliability, transforming a once purely functional ritual into a subtle interaction with technology that required almost no thought. In smart homes, the AI-assisted toilet became a participant in the domestic ecosystem, communicating imperceptibly with plumbing, water supply, and even environmental control systems, all while maintaining an atmosphere of calm and consistency. The quiet hum of these systems, if one attuned their awareness, was a lullaby of engineering, a gentle demonstration of human ingenuity applied to one of the most ordinary and universal acts of daily life, bringing together water, mechanics, and artificial intelligence in a rhythm that was both profoundly technical and serenely unremarkable. If your eyes are closed, if your thoughts are drifting, then my job here is done for today. Thank you for spending this unremarkable moment with me. You have listened to The Sleepy Sloth, where uninteresting things become the softest lullabies.